Good evening. Welcome to Street Talk. I know you're probably expecting that guy with the white beard and the no hair and everything else along here. I'm just the troublemaker that's usually up in Hartford, stirring things up and around for him. Unfortunately, he took the day off today, so I'm here to do the show. We have a great guest for you, Gail Lavielle from the 143rd. She would have been my rep if I still lived down in Norwalk. It's so great to have you here, Gail.
Wonderful to be here, Dominic.
So I have to start out thinking about the people down in Orlando. And, you know, we have to say our prayers out to the family. I do believe that there was one family that was from Connecticut that was affected. I know I'm kind of, the news is coming fast and furious since this just happened on Sunday. And I know you've been through the similar in the way that it's affected you, because this happened in France not so long ago. And it's just horrifying.
It's so terribly sad. And so terribly, my first reaction is always, you know, the unfathomable. What would make anyone want to do this? And how can they bring themselves to pull the trigger or set off the bomb? And it's just so full of horror. It's inexpressible. And the second thing that always comes to my mind is you can't imagine how their families feel, how their friends feel, and I just hope the media will leave them in peace.
Well, I know I was certainly around Newtown, and I know I usually don't bring this up. I know I have a good friend of mine who actually helped with all the police and the fire personnel that had to go into Sandy Hook. I actually lived up in that area for a period of time. And, you know, I mean, she was for a year, nonstop. And you couldn't even get into that community without, like, you know, the level of attention and everything else. And, you know, I think it's so hard for everybody. They want to grasp on to understanding why this happened or what's going on within this. And it's just so hard to comprehend. I mean, in some ways, you have these, you know, lone wolf type people that commit these atrocities, and you know, I wish at some point that this would bring us more together. And I know there are going to be people on both sides, you know, whether it's gun control or whether it's, you know, terrorism. You know, I think the thing that we neglect. And certainly I know this is going to be a big to-do in our upcoming election is, you know, we all have differences. But our differences are ones that we can talk through. They're not ones that are so insurmountable. And I guess I kind of bring this up because I think Connecticut's another situation. It's going to be coming up in the election. There are a lot of people on different sides of you know, the political parties, which are realizing that, you know, things are going to come more to the center, whether it's by, you know, a couple people on one side, or it's going to, you know, possibly change leadership in that. And that has a big effect for Connecticut in some ways, but in other ways, I don't think people understand that there's a difference between Connecticut parties and national parties. And there's a huge difference between the two. And especially when it comes to Republicans on social issues. And I know I've been doing this. I'm a young in political terms. I've only been involved really, you know, because of need to protect, you know, my community for the last 2-3 years. But, you know, when it comes to social issues, and I come and you know, I talk to both sides. I come and talk to Republicans, and everybody's, you would think the opposite, because you look at national politics, but it's not that. It's Republicans they're right on top of the social issues, and usually they're sometimes way ahead of the curve in some respects. And I don't think people truly get a full grasp of that.
No, they don't. And it's a shame because it's one of the things that holds the country back from going anywhere, getting any movement on anything. Because, our big national issues, are things like the economy. And are we getting behind the rest of the world? And should we or should we not be involved here or there in different sort of international situations? And, how do we assume the position of being a very large country? And how do we make sure that people have opportunities? I mean, those are big issues, right? And they get held back in all of this discourse about issues that really should be off the table now. No more discussion. We have a law that allows abortion. We have it. Good. Let's go on to something else now.
Yep.
Let's try not to keep regurgitating things. In Connecticut, I think we have this. I'm very comfortable being a Republican in Connecticut. I will say that, because most of us are, I think, deeply rooted in what was originally behind the way that the Republican Party thought about individual freedom. It's your personal life, it's your business. And regardless of what my opinion may be or not on any issue, it isn't my business to tell you what to do. And it isn't the government's business to tell you what to do when it's a personal decision, period. And that is a very clear way to look at things and to live with them. So that is not something that tends to drive us apart. And it actually has pushed us, I think, as parties in Connecticut to, I guess, finally maybe look some of the most grave and serious issues in the face, which we must do today, and I hope that the populace will follow us.
Well, I mean, I guess it comes down to what's that old saying? It's the economy.
Well, it is.
I want to add stupid because I think there are plenty of intelligent people out there, but it is. I mean, what's going on in Connecticut, and that's not to take away and say that there aren't companies here. There aren't companies that are committed to here. You as a state, you're always competing with 50 other states.
That's right.
And they're more than happy to sit here and pull the rug out from underneath you if you're down. They don't look at it as the unity party. They're looking at their state and their state economy. I mean, I look over at in Indiana, in Indianapolis. They have a lot of our insurance companies. They specifically targeted that industry.
But look what our governor and their governor did to heat that up. They seized on social issue arguments to light the fire and turn what might have been some natural economic rivalry into a very heated political discourse. And that's unfortunate because, I think that, a lot of the decisions that are made in some states in the United States are crazy.
Yep.
But, again,
again, that's why I live here, and I don't live in the deep South or other areas around that.
It's not the way you negotiate a business deal. It's not the way you say, company, you're going to have better conditions here because this is the way our tax structure is, and this is how our transportation works, and this is our school system, and you'll have more clients in our state, or whatever. It's using this national situation where everybody's pitted against each other to heat up problems, heat up the discourse, and create real enmity instead of economic rivalry.
Well, it used to be. I mean, Connecticut, obviously, from our natural placement, obviously we're right in between Boston, we're right in between New York. You can get from one end of it to the next in under like 3 hours, depending on which area you're driving through. But here's what used to attract people, was the taxes.
That's
Because
right.
compared to, the other tri-state areas, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, we used to have lower taxes. We still do have better quality of life, which is what I think holds a lot of what Connecticut has together. I mean, from the shoreline to education, and all the way along. Those are all the things that people, wanted to move to the suburbs to get out of, New York City and other places. I think we still have that, but I think some of the change too is the populations changing, and our
Very much
population
so.
has not grown. I want to say in well over at least a couple of decades.
No, it's shrinking. It's shrinking.
And it's shrinking, and we have to change with the factors that, and I think some areas in the state are. If you go look at like employment, and you go look at what's going on down in Stamford, I think they're a hub of younger people coming into Stamford, and they're changing, and I think that's the world changes, and it's like if you don't change with it, and you don't figure out what the new systems are, then you're gonna kind of be left behind the times.
Well, yes, but I think that, we've heard people say, well, Connecticut's never going to have, not going to be a tax state like Alabama or something. No, of course
No.
not, and we wouldn't aim for that either, because we aim to offer people a better place to live than Alabama. But there are other ways to do this than what we've done. I mean, you don't have to be the state in the 50th worst economic condition, financial condition in the United States. That was the new study by the George Mason University, which is not a partisan organization. It was completely neutral, objective, and put Connecticut in the last place among states for its financial condition, followed only by Puerto Rico, which is not a state. So
No.
that should tell us something. And we actually had a report a couple of months ago by the governor's budget director, Ben Barnes, which gave us all the statistics, explained that, yes, we have recovered most of the jobs that we lost. However, we have lost a tremendous number of high-wage jobs, and those have been replaced and surpassed by low-wage, unskilled jobs. And that's where the job recovery has come from. That means, in monetary terms, that the income tax revenue that the state is recovering on those jobs is much, much, much lower. So even as the state has imposed in the last 6 years the 2 highest tax increases in Connecticut ever, they're actually getting less revenue than those tax increases would have led the various people who do this to project. So we've had consistent revenue shortfalls. There simply aren't the jobs there to produce those revenues, and we've had a net outflow of 13,000 people in Connecticut in the past couple of years. We are losing population, and the population we're gaining is earning a lot less money. So that alone is something we have to grapple
And
with.
I don't think that this is something that people really grasp. And I know this is probably, what we used to call the Gold Coast, because I know I grew up down on the Gold Coast. To be able to change your residency, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not living in Connecticut. It's just you're changing your residency.
That's right.
And you have to go from being 182 days in one place to being 183 or above. And it
Right.
might take a couple of years. So you still have your house up here in Greenwich, and you have your house down there in Florida. It's just you're spending 2 or 3 days like more, and then all of a sudden you're in the place that has no income tax down
That's
there.
right.
And you still have your house up here, so you're still coming up here for the summers, and you're leaving for a couple extra days. So it really, I mean, those are the kind of outflows that people don't really, they're like saying, well, these people aren't leaving. They still have their mansions down in Greenwich. No, they just changed. They just changed their
That's right.
residency.
And they're paying property tax. It's
Yep.
true, but that, for at least the foreseeable future, is still going to the town, not to the state. Property tax. So the state's coffers are immediately, drained of the revenues attached to that person. And Fairfield County pays 45% of the tax revenues to the state. So if you begin to push away people in Fairfield County and businesses, the state suffers. The attitude you see sometimes in Hartford is, well, Fairfield County, they're rich enough, they can absorb it, they should pay more money, they should pay their fair share. But the question that someone who is that wealthy, who can afford a tax increase, let's face it, of course they can afford a tax. Billionaire can always afford a tax increase, I suppose you could say. But do they really want to? No. Can you make them want to? No. So if they choose to live as you've described, or if they choose just to plain go away, they will.
I always think of it kind of like some of the businesses, and I think of some of the ones that are having a great deal of difficulty, like a Macys, that everybody goes there when there's a sale, but they don't go there to shop on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
And because in order to be able to get their revenue back, they have to put on a sale, then everybody creates this expectation that you're just waiting to go in when the sale comes on, because you know that they're going to have a sale.
Right.
And then all of a sudden their revenues kind of like decrease, and they're in real trouble. As opposed to the place, and there are companies that are like this that don't put on sales. They keep their prices low all the time. And then this way,
That's
people
right.
don't wait for the moment of like holding back until there's a sale.
Right. They associate a certain level of quality with that price. It's predictable
Right.
and very reliable, and this can go on for an indefinite period of time. But I think also what people lose sight of is if you do lose higher revenue earners and contributors, and if you do not even lose some companies you have, but if you don't get more new companies that decide not to come here, again, based on tax policy and some regulations and some other fees, then what happens? And this is the part that people lose sight of. If you don't have those very sustainable, reliable revenue streams, who suffers? It's not the rich people in Fairfield County.
No.
It's the people who are depending on hospitals and services for, maybe perhaps to better themselves through some higher education that is, when they get social services we passed a bill that'll give you care for kids, early schooling for your kids if you are going to pursue a higher degree. Services for folks with intellectual disabilities, mental illness, the elderly. And then, once they've started suffering a lot from the lack of funds and the deteriorating services, then you also begin to see that education is going to decline, because just this year there were these huge cuts to education all over the place, which are, even in the wealthy districts, just going to bring on more property taxes. And finally, look at what's happened to our transportation infrastructure, which is just not being fixed at the rate it has deteriorated.
And some of these problems, and I know we bring this up when we talk about like the budget. These are not things that just came in overnight.
No.
These have been developing since about the time I probably came out of high school back in
we
like
were saying
1986.
Yeah.
When we had a large, healthy defense industry that was here. We had a lot of manufacturing jobs in the state, which were created a large middle class. Back then, people were spending money. Back in the mid to late 80s, The coffers were full from sales tax. It was before they started a state income tax. And so along with having all this money, instead of sticking it into a rainy day fund and saying, well, everything that goes up must come down at a certain point in time, they spent more money.
Right.
And not by small amounts. We're talking about
No, very consequential.
10 to 15% like a year. Things went up, and then
That's
we hit the 1991 the Gulf War, and we had the economy that had its first
The boom.
went to bust.
Yeah.
And that's when we had the whole debate about, okay, well, we need a sustainable money to come in. That sales tax kind of goes up and down depending upon, what's going on within the state. And that's where you got the state income tax. And the state income tax, it offset a lot of this stuff for a long period of time. But I think it gave people a false sense of security. And I know since that time, I mean, we go through boom and bust, and we get to the end of the boom, and we've just recovered the jobs that we've lost at the bust, because this is not the first time that this has happened.
No, and they're not the same jobs.
No, they're not.
No.
Exactly, they're not the same jobs. So we get to the end of this, and then all of a sudden we go again into it, and it puts us worse off, because now you're faced with decisions, and like this year was faced with decisions, and sometimes not sometimes the cans be kicked down the road, and whether it's the governors or the legislature have allowed for the retirement accounts to be underfunded or to be not funded, at all, and now. Even though I think legislature last time around, I mean, they tried to address some of these issues as they come up. It's a lot of like the past that we're still being weighted under.
But there's a difference. There's a difference because in the past, they hadn't emptied the well yet.
Yes.
Right? The tax-paying capacity hadn't been reached or exceeded. And the overspending could be cut to a certain point because it really was overspending. While they were overspending, they neglected a lot of things like our infrastructure. And I would add, people love to spread blame. I think, the legislature's been the same for 40 years, so that should take a lot of blame. Same majority for 40 years. But we haven't, as a state, really been well served by our governors for the last 40 years, either regardless of party. So, that's behind us. We really shouldn't worry about who did it. It's how do we fix it. And the well, in terms of taxpayers, is dry. There are always, like I said, ability to pay. Yeah, there's some people who can pay more, but they've got a choice. And do they want to? I don't think so, not at the rate that people in my district are leaving or changing their residency, and others. And there are statistics on that. The other thing is that the cuts that we saw this year, when you start going into ECS money where towns have, education cost-sharing money where towns have been held harmless for ages, and even the wealthy towns, which get very little, never asked for any more than they were getting. And that little has been cut into in order to raise the property tax, really. That's really what it is. It's a disguised tax increase. The cuts to all of these social services. You see what's happened to the DMV, which is completely beyond repair.
The ones that really get me, and I don't think people understand how the system works for certain things. There are some costs that go to the state that we get reimbursed 50% back from the federal government. So when you cut into what you're paying to hospitals, because
that's right.
Here's exactly what happens is they put a tax out on the hospitals, and they say, well, you're going to get the money back because these rates are higher, we can get more money from the federal government. Except you tax them, you do that, but then you hold back the payment that you're going to give them back. So who suffers within that?
Yeah, the people who need the hospitals and the hospitals.
And the hospitals themselves.
Right. That's right. And so it's like they you know, it's a spend of $40 million for us, but it's actually a cut of $130 million to the hospitals.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And but the point is that now we have hit a wall, and there is only one place to go to start cleaning it up. And it is the one place that has not been touched, and that's the fringe benefits in the state labor contracts.
Mm-hmm. So I got to ask the question, because this kind of went by the wayside. What's going on with the state contracts? Because there are some 10 contracts that are supposed to be up right at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's 13.
I remember the first one that came up, and everybody was appalled by it, was the one for
the UConn non-faculty professionals.
Yes.
Yeah, I sit on appropriations, so I actually voted when we took a vote on that contract. And what people don't know, again, is that the labor contracts are negotiated by the executive branch, by the governor and company.
Yep.
The legislature, however, has the right to, and I believe the obligation, to take a vote. And appropriations is just kind of when we vote in there, which we always do, it's just kind of a preference vote. It doesn't really count. It sort of recommends what to do to the full House and Senate. But the full legislature, House floor, Senate floor, has this right, what I call an obligation, to vote on every single contract. And if they do not vote within 30 days, the thing automatically goes into effect. The legislature has not voted on a contract since 1997.
Wow.
And in 2011, which was the first session that I was there for, we, the House Republicans, we don't have the majority, so we couldn't make the House vote on a contract. That was when the governor had opened all the contracts. But we could introduce an amendment to a bill to force everyone to take a vote on whether or not they were going to vote. Okay? So that's what we did.
These Robert's rules are like
well,
get crazy sometimes.
The amendment was we must vote on this contract.
Yep.
And it was the contract that prolonged, the deadline to open all the contracts and look at all the fringes again was 2017.
Yep.
And Malloy had prolonged that to 2022. So we would have voted on that. And we introduced this amendment, and the House Democrats voted down the obligation to vote on that contract. So they said, no, we're not voting on it. We're just going to let it go into effect without our vote. And so the contracts that are coming up now this year are not fringes.
No,
they
are
are
strictly
salaries and some working conditions.
Right.
So the one that came up kind of went down in flames. We divided the motion in appropriations, and there was a tie on the Senate vote. A couple of our people weren't there in the House that day. They were sick, so it passed in the House but went down in the Senate. So it would have gone out with a disapproving vote from appropriations. And suddenly the union pulled the contract. So the rest of those contracts are sitting there waiting to be negotiated, voted on, and so on. I understand that they have been sent to arbitration. I believe, and so was a Democrat I was talking to yesterday, also believes, that was done in order to postpone any decisions on those contracts until after the November election, which I think is very bad faith vis-a-vis the people of Connecticut. Not vis-a-vis us. I don't care about us. I think the people we represent deserve better treatment than that. I also think that it is not impossible. It is not impossible to go to these people whose fault it is not, to the union members. Their leadership's a different story, but the union members, and tell them, folks, you've been promised a pension by the state of Connecticut. You've been promised post-retirement health care benefits by the state of Connecticut. Those obligations are underfunded to the tune of 58%. If we don't do something to change how much money is being put in there, that includes your personal contributions, you're not going to get those benefits. Help us help you.
Wasn't this what Rhode Island did?
Yes, but there's a difference.
Oh,
and
okay.
and I always stop people to explain. It is a little bit harder here, but certainly not impossible. It's just the art of doing it here is a bit different. In Rhode Island, the current governor, who was then the treasurer and who was a Democrat, went around to everybody and explained that, you know, the pensions were underfunded, they weren't going to get one, they have to play ball, they were, and finally, light began to dawn, people began to understand it, but then they were able to fix it because the fringe benefits for state employees in Rhode Island are set in statute. They're part of the law, so all the legislature has to do is change the statute. In Connecticut, they are not set in statute. They are set by contract.
Gotcha.
So the contracts must be renegotiated. There's no way around it.
And the problem's really twofold here, because it's not just that with retirement packages. You're saying to somebody when they come on, okay, you're going to get this set dollar amount, not that we're going to contribute this amount. The problem they have with the set dollar amount right at the moment is they're not getting the return on investment.
That's right. They've way over projected the return on investment.
Right.
It's around 8% that they've stuck in there. And if you look around the country,
I manage my own Scottrade account.
Who is getting 8%?
I'm not getting 8% out of Scottrade.
Of course not.
I mean,
no one's getting
obviously,
8%.
You know, things go up and down within that. But no.
No, that's been very unrealistic. And of course, if we really stuck a realistic percentage in there, things would look even worse, of course. And the other thing is, you know, you will hear, and this is the truth, that the largest portion of those unfunded liabilities are people who have been retired for years. They are no longer making their own contributions. Nope. Okay, that's true, but the problem is that if you keep the level of employee contributions as low as it is now, the obligations are growing faster. They're growing. They're not just staying the same. They're growing and growing and growing. And when you know, the teachers have a legitimate gripe as well, that their pension fund and healthcare fund are somewhat underfunded, not to the same degree, but still underfunded. But teachers are paying 6% of their salary as
they don't pay into Social
retirement
Security.
contribution.
They pay into the teachers' retirement
That's right,
fund.
and they're paying 6%. State employees are paying 2%. 2%.
Well, I know.
Who do you know who pays
2%? I know because our last time out in dealing with brain injury stuff had to do with the state who wanted to take away or actually privatize social workers. And
yes,
the thing that they got caught on in December was they didn't do a cost-benefit analysis, which by law they're supposed to.
How can you do these things without doing a cost-benefit analysis?
So I got the cost-benefit analysis, and I was shocked because within that I got, okay, what are the percentages? And God knows I've run my own company. You had your you know, your friends that you knew that you were going to have to pay. You had your unemployment tax, you had your half of Social Security, you had your workers' comp. You know, you had a formula in your head, and when you were analyzing, okay, can I take this person in and, you know, be able to afford to pay the employees? And mine was usually, you know, with healthcare and everything else, was usually about 1.2 to 1.3. Okay. So I take a look at their cost benefit analysis. 25% for retirement, and that's not including the people that are in hazardous pay.
Oh,
Theirs,
yeah.
theirs are actually 50%.
Right.
Employee health care benefits, 25%. So right off the top, before I even hit, like, the other half of Social Security and everything else, you're talking about 1.5, and now you add in those other factors, you're coming up to like 1.75. So that means for somebody paying $50,000 that you're actually paying them, there's another $37,500 that you're paying in fringe benefits on top of that. So that person's not just a $50,000 salary. They're really an $87,500
Exactly.
salary. And I'm like, no wonder we're so shot. Now you take those people, because you know what? There's like the average people that get paid, and they get paid reasonably well from the state. They're not, not killing it.
Right.
And then you throw in their overtime.
Which counts in the calculation of their retirement pay.
Right. And then you throw in not just that amount. You throw in the people that are high level management or are within some of those agencies. They're not getting paid $50,000. They're getting paid $100,000 to $150,000.
That's exactly right.
And so now you're talking about somebody who's making $100,000. There are 175 that you're actually having to pay them. That's the ones that I think people have issues with. And I know I go to like several different people's, legislative coffee hours and everything else, and you talk about them. And, it's not the guy that's making $50,000 that, is going to have like a pension for that amount. It's these crazy salaries that you're paying to, like, some of the professors and some of the high-level management, and they're more than competitive. Because when you usually think about back in my day, when I had a choice, I said, okay, do I want to go work for the state, or do I end up going into private business? And you knew that if you were going to go work for the state, you were going to get paid less money, but you were going to get, something on the back end for your benefits or your other things. So the two balanced out. But now the compensation's not exactly like the same right at the moment. It's, okay, we're competitive with the private sector, but on top of it, we have all these benefits that we're paying out. And now everybody's clamoring, and what are they doing? They're laying people off because they figure that that's the way that they're going to save money. But that savings doesn't really come around for a period of time.
No, and there's some severance and things like that. And it's in many ways, it's not a solution. One is that we have a number of agencies that are simply no longer providing the level of service that they should be providing. DDS is one. The DMV is certainly another. I mean, that's just a wreck. I'll say that again, a wreck. But
yes, I felt their wrath.
Yes, but needless. But anyway, but the other thing, we had a legislative town hall last night in Westport, and somebody asked me, "What do you think? If you presented to the state employees the idea that they could, if they would agree to a few concessions on the amount of contributions they make to their own benefits, that maybe there wouldn't be layoffs. What do you think they would say?" And I said, you know what, that's a very interesting question, because I know already, because I talk to union members a lot. I don't see any reason not to find out what people have on their minds, and on the contrary. And I know already that some of them would say, we really don't need layoffs. It's going to make our job harder. It's going to put people out of a job. That's, this is not a big thing. And plus, it'll help me get my own pension. Yes, I'll do this. I said, my instinct is to tell you that the employees, they're not hostile to this, but their leadership is an entirely different story. And that is who the negotiations are held with. I had a very interesting experience back during the session. I think it was beginning of April, something like that. I received an invitation by email from one of the larger unions to go to Bridgeport. They called it a kind of speed dating thing. They would have 10 union members at a table, and they'd have a bunch of tables, and you'd sit down and spend 10 or 15 minutes with each table. And there'd be all these legislators and stuff. So I'm like, okay, this will be interesting. I'll go. So I show up. And there they were at their tables. There were a lot of people there, but it was really strange. I was the only legislator there.
Really?
I was it, and it was in Bridgeport. Senator Gomes came for a minute to say hi and left again. So there I was. And I became, you had to have me at your table because there wasn't anything but me. So I had to fight to stay at the same table long enough to hear something, and it was great. I heard from an enormous number of people. And I heard two messages. There are, again, when you get into all this politicizing of discourse, people get very misinformed very quickly. And so, walking in there, if I had said to someone, from my town or something, what do you think they said to me? The first thing they would say would be, well, I'm sure they told you to go tax the rich. They're sick of everybody beating up on them. You should be taxing the rich. Well, I did not hear that. I heard two things. One was, and these were rank and file union members. Some worked they were prison guards, they were probation officers. Some worked at the vocational technical schools. There were a very big assortment of people. And the two major things I heard were, why does everybody hate us so much? And, they feel very put upon and outlawed, vilified, because, they are the state employees. Why are they blaming us? So we discussed that, and I said, I think when people know what they're talking about, they don't blame you, but I get where you're going. And then the second thing that they said was, what we resent a lot? We resent people who are taking advantage of the social services systems, people who really could be going to work and don't, people who just take, and are gaming the system, and you've got to stop that. Those were the two most frequent things I heard, and I could not disagree with either. In fact, I agreed with them. And it goes to show you, I think what it goes to show you is that people are people, and I think that folks tend to forget that when they become too heavily steeped in politics. At the end of the day, people are people.
Well, I always have to say this to some of my friends, because I know they go after politicians, beat on one side or the other, and they're like, well, they shouldn't be paid for what they do and this and that. And I'm like, look, everybody that comes into this, they're doing this because they want to make a change. Whether what their core values might be different than what's yours, but everybody who walks in, those 151 legislators that go into the House, those 36 senators, even our good governor, honestly walk in and go and run for office because they want to make a change, and they think it's their duty in a lot of ways to help. I mean, everybody walks into the office. Whether the office changes them over a period of time and makes things different in the way that they handle it, or they see, opportunities that might take them off of the track. But they're all people up there.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that. I've seen so much in the way of behavior since I've been involved in this. And I think that even, especially I would say when you're in public office, the same rules of tact should apply. And people don't always see it that way. I think that politicians, elected people, do owe the public something, and one of, I mean, apart from doing your job well and all that, representing your constituents, one is telling the truth, not distorting it for, you know, the benefit of something you want to do or yourself or somebody else or whatever. You know, tell the truth. If something isn't going well, just say so. If you think you made a mistake on a vote and somebody asks you, say so. People make mistakes. I think honesty is sometimes a quality that is, I don't mean, you know, when they say integrity, I haven't committed any crime, I haven't stolen any money. Well, we hope not, you know, God, yes. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about really not distorting the facts. And then the other thing is not exploiting the truth or a situation or facts for your own purposes. And I have seen people, I'll never forget, I mean, in the kind of the shadow of Orlando now, I remember when, right after Newtown, the place was swarming. I did not go. We live, Wilton is about, I don't know, 30 minutes from Newtown. I did not go. The place was swarming with politicians who did not live in Newtown or represent Newtown. And they were firing off statements about how deeply they sympathized, how their heart went out, how they were going to collect letters, how they were going to do this and do that, trying to get on television. And I thought, how can you exploit people's fear and grief like this? You know, what is it? Say you're very, very sorry, and then let the people who...
I will tell you, because I am good friends with the legislator from Newtown who caught crap because she basically asked people to leave, like, her town alone. And her and I have, you know, I've talked. We're good
Certainly.
friends.
I remember that.
You know, she told me that you will never understand how much this has affected me until you have to go to 26 different funerals for kids.
And I don't understand it because I didn't have to go to 27 funerals. But I just know what my instinct tells me is that you don't jump on a tragedy and use it for your own purposes. Now, you might use it, you know, if there's something that can improve the situation and not make it happen again, but just to go off on someone else's tragedy as though it were yours, so that you can get visibility. There's a very fine line there.
It's a difficult line, and I know everybody's already jumped across it because you got one guy saying I'm right, and then you got the other side saying, well, we need to be on, like, the gun control issue. And I know, you know, I post a lot of stuff on Facebook, and honestly, I posted up, you know, no political message.
Yeah.
I'm just sad for the families.
It's great sadness. Something like this could happen, and in this case, of course, something that may make in this case the LGBT community might make them frightened. That's uncalled for. That is absolutely uncalled for.
And I don't think people really recognize, like, how close they are to all these different things. That, you know what, it's not just something that happened down in Orlando. I have you know, a friend that has a family member that was in that club, like, not less than a week ago. I have another friend who lives down in that area. That was not just a year ago, taking her daughter to chemo treatment right next to it, and there's a Dunkin' Donuts in between that and you know, and the bar, and that's where they went to when they were going down there for treatment. And you think of these things and you think that they're happening in a vacuum, but just because we have such a large, you know, country that we live in.
There's no vacuum anymore.
No. And it really, you realize how, you know, interconnected people are, and how this not just, you know, it touches so many, like, people's lives.
Yeah, and once again, they're people. We are all
Yeah.
people. We share that, and you know, it's mind numbing, and but I think that there is always a priority place for tact.
There is.
And I'm sorry when I see an absence of it.
And there is an opportunity to sit here and say that, no, we shouldn't sweep these issues under the rug, and we need to be able to talk about them. But there is a time. There is a time to be able to talk about some of this stuff, and it doesn't need to be right after a tragedy. And I think, no doubt, that when you see the amount of news coverage that comes out of these things, certainly the things that comes to my mind is, you got one crazy person who's going to want to outbeat the next crazy person, and
Well, I know.
the
I mean,
bloodshed.
I think of those poor people in that church
Yeah.
who were shot. I don't even remember. There's been so many of these, I don't remember when they were. But again, we're here reporting, and it's been 5 days, and people are grieving, and they're you don't shove a microphone in their face. But I don't mean by any of this, just in case anyone misinterprets it, that these aren't signals that things need to change. I voted for the bill after Newtown because I thought that was the right thing to do, and certainly that subject needed to come up, and certainly it was the subject of much civilized discussion in the legislature, and I think we handled it in a mature way and did come out with a bill that many of us voted for. But I just mean the tone of discourse and the moments that are chosen and some of the ulterior agendas that are behind what people do when they're in politics that had nothing to do with the issues. And that's when you have to think, I'm not here for myself, really, I'm not. I'm here for the people I represent. So.
And God bless you. And I know that this time around, you're blessed not to have an opponent. So that means that you're going in unopposed this time. But I know we like to give you the last couple of minutes to talk to your constituents that are out there, not just of your area, but I mean I think of you also you represent a large block of the people that I deal with. So we'll give you the last few minutes just to say about this upcoming election.
I mean, I would say, first off, being unopposed is not something that I take for granted.
No.
It's never happened to me before. It doesn't mean that you can just kick back and not do anything. I mean, part of this job is to be out there hearing from people and be accessible to them, whatever it is that they want to say. So I just think it makes me feel even more responsible for the district that I represent and other constituencies that are involved with the same issues. I think I have felt as ranking member of education that I really have to be attentive to the entire state because we have a policy-making responsibility.
My son counts on you.
Well, and then that's even a heavier responsibility. But it certainly is with my goodness, advocates like you. And for those who don't know, Dominic is in the legislature practically every day, it seems, and we count on him to keep us informed about lots of things. But there are so many issues facing us, and I think that certainly in my memory, I don't know that Connecticut has been at such a crossroads, and something must change. I hope that something will change in the composition of the legislature, because not having a balance between the parties for the past 40 years has led us down some tracks where we need to turn around now. And so I do hope that in the election we have 12 seats in the House between the two parties. I hope we'll see a change of direction there. There are plenty of people across the aisle I love working with. So maybe we'll do more of that.
I get a distinct feeling that things are going to be different, whether it's a close situation or if it changes hands. Personally, I think, there's a benefit in some level of divided government. I think you might not get to everything that you want, but the things that you get to, you do better. And that's the way that I kind of like see it within that. And as much as it's set up this way, government is set up to be obstructionist to prevent crazy stuff from happening. Mm-hmm. And that's the way that I think our founding fathers realized that, that's why you have senators that go for 6 years, and you have a House that goes every 2 years, and a president.
Not in Connecticut, though.
No, and that's a different
in Connecticut, the Senate and the House are exactly the same. There is no difference between the job description except the number of constituents.
But I know we have to end here, and I know our good people out there are going to think about these issues, and certainly, we hope that we educate people, and we give them the opportunity to make the decisions for themselves.
And that is how it should be.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
coming on
Dominic.
once again. And we will see you guys next time around. We can run the street.